The LA Chargers are just one of those teams in the NFL that have found their strategy, have found their way of operating, maneuvering in the NFL draft. They've just figured it out, and they're really, really good at it. And once again, I think the LA Chargers have had a very good draft in 2019. Gronk, spike the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's Mitch here of The Bottom Line View, here to give you my grade, my thoughts on the overall draft of the LA Chargers. So let's start off with Jerry Tillery, their first round pick, which I think was overall probably the Chargers' biggest need. They needed a defensive tackle, but they didn't just need any defensive tackle. They needed a guy that was pretty big. They got that, 6'6", 300 pounds. But to fit their scheme, they also needed a guy with enough athleticism and enough just pure ability to play in their scheme, because the Chargers are typically a defense built on speed. They're a defense built on speed because they play more of that Seattle type of scheme. And Jerry Tillery fits this position to a T at defensive tackle. Brandon Meebane's getting a little bit older, but he can still play a little bit. They lost one of their starting defensive tackles from a season ago to free agency. They still really don't have much depth at this position, so Tillery's going to be an immediate impact player at this spot. This was definitely their biggest need overall. So Jerry Tillery comes in. He's athletic enough to play on all three downs. He could potentially be one of the biggest steals of the first round, considering his pure athleticism, considering his potential at this position, and considering his quickness for this spot. He has an ability to not only be a big run stuffer, but also potentially be a pretty good pass rusher at this spot as well. So I really like this pick, Jerry Tillery. The Chargers knew they needed to get bigger inside. They knew that they got ran over by the New England Patriots in the playoffs against the run, so they addressed it with Jerry Tillery in the first round, and I really love this pick. And then in the second round, of course, what else would the Chargers do but pick a safety corner hybrid and Nasir Adderley of Delaware. I really think, the Chargers, they just love safeties. They love these hybrid corner safety guys that can do so many different things for their secondary. And of course, they have Derwin James. They have Adrian Phillips. They did lose a safety in Jael Adai from last season's starting lineup. Adai played quite a bit. Adai was actually the guy that played more than not in the box a little bit as that extra safety that they really loved using. They also use Phillips a little bit in that role. Derwin James is versatile in that way as well. Nasir Adderley is more of the free safety type, so I absolutely love seeing them just add to a position of strength, because they already had a pretty good combination there in Phillips and James, but they add Nasir Adderley as their third safety in the rotation, taking over for Adai, and now he's more of a guy that can play a little bit more free safety. He's a little bit more rangy. He has that speed, athleticism to cover a little bit more than some of the guys they already have, and I think that is something they do miss a little bit in their back end. They have a lot of these safeties that are bigger, more like can play a little bit of linebacker, can play in the box a bit, but they don't really have that free safety guy. So Nasir Adderley, he fits a need, he fits the scheme well, and I think he could potentially be a really nice combo and potentially a starter beside Derwin James for many years to come. So I like that pick as well in the second round. In the third round, they get Trey Pipkins, offensive tackle, and we knew that the Chargers needed tackles. Sam Tevi, arguably their worst offensive lineman last year. Probably not even arguably. He was their worst offensive lineman last year. So what do? They go out and they address the position, and they bring in a guy like Pipkins, who is going to probably compete for the starting position here at right tackle after getting picked in the third round. And at the very least, he can sit a year and then develop into a guy that can be a tackle for them on their starting line. He's 6'6", 309 pounds. He's interesting. I think he needs some time to develop. He needs some seasoning, but overall, I think he can be a guy to develop into a starter for the Chargers, and it's always worth taking a offensive lineman in the third or fourth round, because these guys, like I've said many times, they can develop into starters. We've seen it many times before. We've seen it with my Patriots included, that these third, fourth round picks on offensive linemen are wise picks because a lot of them develop into pretty good players. In the fourth round, they go with Drew Tranquill of Notre Dame, linebacker, a guy that was a converted safety to linebacker. So he's another guy that's very athletic, has speed, has athleticism, 6'2", 235, fits the defensive scheme. Now, he's probably not going to play as much as any of these other guys will in the first 3 rounds for the Chargers, but he'll play on special teams a little bit. He's another depth guy to add to their linebacking core. We've seen a lot of injuries take place for the Chargers at the linebacker position, so Tranquill is a nice little guy to add to the linebacker position. I think the pick that a lot of Chargers fans are a little bit excited about is Easton Stick of North Dakota State. He has some interesting traits because he replaced Carson Wentz in college, and he kind of lived up to those expectations for the most part. He's pretty athletic. He's 6'1", 224. He's not the tallest guy in the world, but he's a pretty good athlete. He had a 40-yard dash of 4.62, so that's pretty good for a quarterback. He has a decent arm overall, and if they can develop this guy, he's a third-string quarterback right now. He could end up being the replacement for Phillip Rivers. I wouldn't count on it, but he does have some traits that are interesting, and from a smaller school, we often see a lot of these guys go later in the draft and develop into decent quarterbacks, at least backups in the NFL. So I like Easton Stick here in the 5th round. Not a bad kind of floater, not a bad kind of just see what happens type of pick. And then they add 2 players to their defensive line, again, in the 6th and 7th round. Just good choices overall. I just think to add some more depth to their defensive line. You can never have enough depth on your defensive line, and the Chargers definitely needed that in terms of the size department. They get one guy in Broughton from Cincinnati, who's 6'2", 293, so add some more size to the position. And they add more of an edge rusher at 6'2", 245 in the kid from Houston. So all these guys fit their scheme very well. All of these guys suit a role. All these guys fit a need. I think the Chargers are just figuring out how to maneuver the draft for players that fit needs, but also fit their scheme very well. And they're doing a fantastic job at really the draft in general over the past couple of years. And I think they nailed, again, another pretty good draft. They didn't have a lot of assets to work with, but they did their best. And they picked very good players worth the value in their spot. So overall, I have to give the LA Chargers an A- because I think they did very well with the Tillery pick that fit their biggest need in the first round. They got a safety that's perfect for their scheme in the second round, a safety/corner, and then they got an offensive tackle that could potentially be a starter right away or 1 year down the line in Pipkins in the third round. And then everything else on top of that is depth, icing on the cake, but the Chargers did a good job here in the 2019 draft. Let me know what you guys think. Gronk, spike the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Peace.